Lesson 14.13 is integrals and average rate of change from a table. These problems I found you have to be very, very careful on what the question is asking you to find, because there are several different types in this lesson. That's why we're doing 6 different examples together, because I really want you to understand what they're wanting you to find for each problem based on what the wording says. So they'll all say that you've got 2 functions, f and g. They're continuous and differentiable, which just means they don't have any breaks or jumps in them, so that we can find the derivative and the antiderivative. And then it's going to say something prime is something else. What this means is if I were to take the derivative of g, I'm going to get f. That means that this guy is the antiderivative. Just keep that in mind, that this is the antiderivative. So it's like the answer to if I'm going to derive this. And it says selected values are shown in the table. They're wanting us to find, or they're telling us that the area of the curve of f of x from 1 to 13 is 10. What is the value of g of 1? So I'm going to go ahead and antiderive this and say, well, if I've got f of x and I want to antiderive, that's going to give me g. So I'm going to do g of 13 minus g of 1. That's the best way to put it, is what we're doing when we see this. It's like having g of x from 1 to 13, and then I'm plugging in my b minus plugging in my a. And then I get that equals 10 because they're telling me. Then I'm going to come to my table and try to figure out what these are. I know I'm trying to find g of 1, so I'm not going to have a value there, but g of 13 is actually 0. And this becomes an algebra problem, so I don't really have to add or subtract 0 at all. But if I have negative g of 1 equals 10, I'm dividing away the negative 1 to say that g of 1 actually equals negative 10. So something that wasn't on the table, I'm able to find with algebra. All right, number 2, we got the same setup where g prime, this is the antiderivative again. We might need to know that, we might not. Selected values are given. What is the average rate of change? Average rate of change is simply the slope. I don't need to do anything with the antiderivative when I find slope. I'm finding the slope of g of x from 0 to 9. So my slope formula is like y2 minus y1, or g of 9 minus g of 0 over 9 minus 0. A y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. G of 9 is 1. G of 0 is 4. Those are my y values. Then I'm dividing by 9 minus 0, which is 9. That would be negative 3/9, which is negative 1/3. That's simply saying my slope is making a line that's got down 1, right 3. So those are really, really easy. Just don't let them trick you up and think you have to do more work than you need to. Number 3, we've got this time that f prime of x. So if I were to take the derivative of this, I would end up with g of x. So this time f of x is my antiderivative. What is the value? So what is the area of the curve from 2 to 12 of g of x in simplest form? So this is where I would think, okay, I'm going to antiderive this function, which I know is f of x, and I'm doing it from 2 to 12. So I would have f of 12 minus f of 2. F of 12 is 1, f of 2 is 2, and 1 minus 2 is negative 1. So the area of the curve there would be negative 1, meaning it's below the x-axis. All right, number 4, we've got g of x being our antiderivative. Selected values are shown. Use a right Riemann sum. So we're going back to that. Right Riemann sum to find the area. It's an approximate because remember those pictures of rectangles aren't exact, especially a right and a left Riemann sum are not exact. So it's an approximation from 2 to 12 of g of x. So what I'm trying to do is use g of x to do those rectangles. So I'm going to have 2 to 12. Remember, this is going to be a rectangle, this and this. So I should have 3 sums here using the g of x values. It's very tempting to want to anti-derive, but that's not what it's asking us to do because that would get an exact area. They want the right hand. So between these 2 points, I'm going to use the -8. I'll use 1 and I'll use 6. I'm not going to use the -6 since it's the leftmost point. I need to find the change in the x because that's the width of each rectangle. So that would be a 3. So I would have a width of 3 times a height of -8 plus a width of 4 and then times 1 for my second rectangle. And then that's a change of 3 for my width times a height of 6. And that's all I'm doing. So that's -24 plus 4 plus 18. That would be -20 plus 18, which would have an area of -2. Again, an approximation, not exact. Number 5, we've got g is the antiderivative. Selected values are shown. The average value of f of x on the interval 1 to 10 is equal to 1 was the value of g of 10. So they're not giving us any of the notation. We have to break apart in our head what does average value of f of x mean? Well, that's finding the antiderivative on an interval and then dividing by b minus a. Our interval goes from 1 to 10. We're finding the average value of f of x with respect to x divided by 10 minus 1. And they're telling us that that is 1. They're going to want us to find g of 10 because I don't see an x value of 10 on this table. So this is going to be an equation we set up and have to solve for. So if I want to antiderive this, I already know that g of x is the antiderivative. So I would have g of x from 1 to 10, getting divided by 10 minus 1 is 9. That would be g of 10 minus g of 1 divided by 9. And again, this is equaling 1 here. G of 10, I don't know. G of 1 is 1 over 9. So think of this as a proportion. I would cross multiply or multiply by the denominator. So now I've got that g of 10 minus 1 equals 9. Add 1 to 9, and that makes g of 10 equal 10. So that becomes a point. And last but not least, we've got this being the antiderivative. Put AD. We've got the average value of g of x. What is the average value of g of x on the interval 5 to 11? So what is the average value? That means we're going to integrate and we're going to divide. We're going 5 to 11 of g of x, with respect to x, 11 minus 5. So antiderivative of g of x, we already identified it's f of x. So I'm really doing f of x from 5 to 11 divided by 6. And that means taking f of 11 minus f of 5 and dividing by 6. F of 11 is -5. F of 5 is -6. That'll be plus 6 divided by 6. That'll be 1/6 is the average y value. So again, pay very close attention. If it's average rate of change, all you're doing is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. If it's just finding the area of something, you're not dividing. You're just going to calculate the antiderivative or do a Riemann sum and add up all the rectangles and get an approximation. Or if it says average, you have to divide by your b minus a.